Yeah.
Morning, David.
Morning, David.
Or you want to wait a minute?
We told people 8. We have a lot of people here already, so we should give the people who we told 8 o'clock. We should give them till 8 o'clock.
Screen sharing. I don't know when I don't know actually how to monitor. So 350 members and some very involved in the tech community around Southern California, and been in Southern California for a long time as a technology executive. Before that, I did write a paper, and if it's a good paper, you present it again. And I mention that because it's once again it's interwoven the way I think about this in the presentation that I'm going to give you in a minute. We work with companies, everything from small startups, usually B series is the smallest, up to the Walt Disney Company. I guess that's my next slide. And the problems tend to be the same of how people think about building technology from a variety of range of companies. And the problems can be about process, they can be about communication, they could be about organization, they could be about architecture, but you see the same themes between these companies, even though they're very different. And so once again, that's going to be interwoven through the presentation. The other thing we do besides looking at companies, we coach and mentor CTOs, we do interim executive work, we also do due diligence, like I talked about going to Herzliya a little bit earlier, for VCs and PE firms. And that's a very different kind of look into companies, but you still see the same kind of things. So I'm going to leave you with 3 things today that I think are important to get alignment between CTOs, CEOs, chief product officers. Thinking about customer value, epic statements, and retros. I'll point out where they are. But these, I think, I'm going to argue are the 3 main topics. We talked a little about OKRs in the beginning. OKRs are a method for organization and communication, but I'm arguing that these 3 things are the most fundamental to get alignment with those, or with between those, that triangle between those 3 groups. If we have time at the end, I'm going to go off topic and talk about some ways that you shouldn't communicate, as well as some ways that you should. If there's only one slide that you remember from this presentation, it's this one. At the end of the day, your CEO is trying to create a sustainable company with high value. If you are trying to get alignment, if you want to be aligned with your CEO, do the same thing. Do the same thing. I argue there's 5 things. Don't worry about the revenue, particularly in your position. Don't worry about the revenue. The revenue is a side effect of delivering revenue. The world's not going to be a path to your door. That's what the whole thing about building a better mousetrap in the world being path to your door. That's BS. My children are home, so I just use the abbreviation. That's what you need marketing and sales for. But you need to create the state by which you build a product that delivers value. Gross profitability is a side effect. Gross profitability in a technology company is super high because the transactional cost of adding a client is net zero. In a software company, harder in a hardware company. I worked at Meta. I was interim CTO and chief product officer at Meta, which was the unit cost was more, the unit revenue, the unit margin was less because it was producing hardware. But in software, the net margin's like nearly 100%, so you don't have to worry about this bullet. Awesome, Mazel tov, great, we're good. Net profit, you have to worry about that a little bit. Your CEO is going to worry about this, which is what's the expense to produce the software, the thing that you're making, and the intrinsic value of the company is going to be the sum of all the discounted cash flows. I realize now it's spelled wrong in my slide. I apologize.
Creating a sustainable company with high value was specifically not our strategy, and that was the strategy set by the CEO. And in this particular, in fact, our specific strategy that was driven by the CEO in this one situation I'm talking about involved us boosting our engineering headcount, because we were well aware that in the acquisition market we were in, that the value per engineer was a far bigger knob to turn for the exit strategy that isn't this too.
So I agree. And, reviewing this presentation, putting this presentation together, right? Every time I do a presentation, I look at there's on the slide, which I'll talk about a little bit later afterthought. I have a slide cost center. Every year they come to you and say, I'd like you to do more for less. Good year last year. Congratulations. Thank you very much. I want you to do more for less next year. If you're in a profit center where the thing that you do produces the revenue for the company, then this slide makes much more sense. And I argue that you don't want to be in a cost center because it's really painful and what you don't get a seat at the table. Now, there are different stages of companies. And you're talking about an end stage company. End stage, I mean that it's going through an acquisition or some kind of a transaction, right? It could be an acquisition. It could be going public it depends on what are the attributes that make that transaction happen. That becomes very important, exceedingly important, the most important thing. And this slide here is temporarily unimportant. But then you reset and you come back to this. That's my argument. Next, do you agree or disagree?
Sounds about right.
Okay. I'm glad to talk about that more. But company where you're trying to drive value by creating sustainable company, creating value for customers. The thing about metrics is of engineering and product together and look a lot like I'm running really fast. I'm running really fast is interesting and important, but I'm running really fast in the wrong direction just gets you lost faster. And because these metrics don't have significant meaning to most CEOs, you're going to lose them in this communication. You can say, I got some metrics I want to communicate with you. By the way, I run some others to talk about my department, to run my department. I'm glad to talk with you about them too. But if this is the focus of your conversation, you're going to have an alignment problem. The same with chief product officers. Roadmaps are more interesting to CEOs. I hesitated putting it on this slide. But user stories and bugs and sometimes usage that CPOs communicate it's more nuanced, right? Because CPOs are closer to what that CEO alignment I'm doing, but oftentimes these are communicated incorrectly, particularly small level user stories are too nuanced, too tactical to be interesting to most CEOs. Roadmaps tend to be more interesting, but only if you do them the right way. So back to my first thing, if you're going to create value for a customer, you can only be successful if you understand your customer. Engineering and product management both. Your customer is not marketing and sales. I've been in companies where the CEO has said to me, you serve marketing and sales, that's who you do, make them happy and everything goes well. And my argument is that you got a problem if that's the conversation. Unless, by the way, once again, in end state conditions where you're going through a transaction. So I'll meet a CEO. Now remember, the companies bring Interna in because either they're about to hit a growth curve, and what got them there from technology and product is not going to get to the next state, and they don't, they cobble things together, and they're a B-series company, and they're about to take off, and they don't know how to do it. That's one reason they call us. Second reason is the CEO or the board or married. His name was Ken Johnson. So Ken and I were friends, and I said to Ken, well, describe this woman that you'd like to get married to. And if I meet someone, I'd like to make an introduction. And he looked at me and said, David, you don't understand the problem. And I said, well, no, Ken, just describe it. Like, you want someone tall or short? He was an African-American guy. Kombucha, you can tell I live in Southern California. Not only is it kombucha, a lot easier to engineer this stuff up front before you write any code. So you know why stuff's on the roadmap. So we've done two of the three things. One is understanding business value. Second is aligning epic statements to creating customer value against it. There's a hidden benefit of epic statements. Is it not only create alignment between CEOs and chief product officers and chief technology officers, they tend to create alignment among people in engineering and product organizations. So in every presentation, you need to quote some famous CEOs had inordinate success. So I choose Elon Musk in this presentation. Could choose Steve Jobs. You got, there's, you can choose Bill Gates. This one gets Elon Musk. So Elon says, every person in your company is a vector, and your progress is determined by the sum of all vectors. So vectors, for those of you who remember linear algebra, vectors have two components: a magnitude, how big, and a direction, which way they're pointing. Magnitude is, did you hire smart people? And the direction is, are they aligned? If they're unaligned, you won't get forward movement in the company the way you might want to. By having an epic statement where people know where they're supposed to go, you tend to get two values, which is they think about how they're going to do things and they see if they're in alignment. Anyway, when you program things, there's 3 ways of doing it, 4 ways of doing it. The odds of making consistently good choices only work if you understand the context. Same with the product. Okay, so that's two things.
Just a question on the epic statement.
Please, yes.
Yeah. So, I absolutely believe that platitudes can be very effective at alignment, yes, especially if they're repeated regularly and consistently. They're used as a framework to explore or bound other types of conversations. Mm-hmm. My experience has been that the content of the platitude is actually not that important. It's a little bit like, the name of your startup is totally unimportant, in my opinion, as well. Do you think that beyond the generic, culturally relevant things that you want to provide to your team, that your epic statement, like the content itself matters? Like, do you have to struggle to get it right? Do you help folks write one of those? Or is it just the fact that you have a CTO who is doing some messaging and providing a foundational statement like that? And the second follow-up question would be, isn't that often something the CEO wants to do? Like if I lay out a vision statement for the engineering org and that vision statement doesn't exactly map to what my CEO's vision statement is, there's going to be some struggle.
Yes to most of those and no to a couple of them. I'll try to go through them. Yes to, if your epic statement are out of alignment with the CEO, you got a problem, right? And so you don't have one epic statement, you have multiple of them. Every major thing on the roadmap gets an epic statement, and that definitely has to be created, and the CEO needs to see it, to understand it, to be able to argue with it, 100%. I think they're more than platitudes, though. And because you need to measure yourself against epic statements. You need to measure your team against epic statements, and there needs to be a full loop. And so they need to be thoughtful. And so I'm gonna try to pack in several things here. So
okay, great. Sorry.
My wife and her family are all Israeli, so I've got a lot of practice. So the epic statements need to be meaningful. My argument is that all product managers are bad at their job. Everyone. They're bad at their job because it's not a job you can be good at. Because until a product hits the market, you don't know if you got it right. And there's this myth of Steve Jobs that he knew everything right, and Apple was a perfect company because of him. Well, two things. He's dead. Second of all, it's also not true. I was talking with with Evan Spiegel, the CEO of Snap, just before they went public. And I said, Evan, you guys are awesome. Like everything you guys are doing is really, really is great. You guys are getting it all right. And he said, no, we're not. We just don't market the stuff we screwed up. Right? So the value of the epic statement is predicting which way you're going to go, but then you've got to retro them. People know about retroing sprints. Oh, we have a 2-week sprint. Here's our velocity. Here's what we expect our velocity to believe. Here's stuff that, here's what went well that we want to keep doing. Here's things that didn't go well that we want to change. I like this. I wish this. I'll do this. Everyone knows how to retro sprints. People don't retro epic statements. It's the reason, and the reason this is important is you're going to get some of them wrong. You damn well better learn from it. Don't retro them the day that you do your release. You got to wait till the market sees it. 2 weeks, 3 weeks, 4 weeks, how they interact with it. If you get every one of your epic statements right, you've done it wrong. It means you haven't tried hard enough. You haven't stressed hard enough. It's not just that product managers are all bad at their job, but just like OKRs, you should expect some failures on this. I worked on an authorized assistant for American Express years ago, back when I was doing the AI tools company. And I said, authorized assistant did automatically every transaction would determine, I'll just skip that slide. This goes back to a question that was asked before about, David, isn't it true that not all companies are like this? They're trying to create that is a minimum number of cases, but there's also another set of cases where what I suggested won't be successful for you. And those are, if your company is not growing or can't grow, you're going to have a whole boatload of other problems. Alignment with the CEO is going to be about, we need to cut heads. There's other stuff that we need to, we need to figure out how to cut costs. There's a bunch of, or we have no idea what this market wants. And so I want you just to make a bunch of just different bets. And we company where you get to actually own and lead the team. You're empowered to lead the team. Sorry, you're able to lead the team. You have the skills. You're empowered to lead the team. The company wants you to do it. You got the right people. If you don't have the right people, none of this will work. You got to fix your people problem. And you have a seat at the table that you can talk with the CEO and you matter. If any of these things are not true, you got to change the company or get out of the company, because none of this will be successful. Doesn't mean that it's fatal, but you got to be really thoughtful. That will get you fired. That'll get you fired because you're going to miss dates. You just are. And what the CEO thought the company wanted, or what the product person thought the company wanted, is probably poorly described because they don't know exactly. They're probably going to reinterpret in their head. So when you do the release, it's not what they think. The requirements might change. It's not going to happen June 5th. And the other executives are going to be really concerned when they don't hear from you because they don't know what you're doing, even if you're doing a great job. So that's failure mode 1. Failure mode 2. We're going to get it done June 5th. I'm going to publish on Jira or something, or on Tracker and something like that when our progress is, and you can look at that any time. You can know where we are. That's a fail, because no one's going to look. They don't even understand it. The only method that works is, we think we're going to get it done by June 5th, and I'm going to give you regular demos. And I'm going to show you and ask you to attend and give us feedback. Because A, you're going to slip, they'll see the choices that you're making, and your demos are going to paint between the lines for the thing they asked. And they will have a higher level of confidence because they see what's going on in an interim basis. I had a bit of concrete. You guys are actually building new materials every time. We're about to redo our home to put together blueprints on what we want. We won't understand it till we see it. Same with your CEO, with your software. You've got to constantly demo things so they know where you're at. A. B is, and that's kind of standard agile stuff, but you got to do it. B is love the time box. If you have a choice between getting features into a system or hitting a date, and you have flexibility on what those features are, you're not doing that first MVP, hit the date, cut features every time. Because that gets you early release into the market, and you find out whether your epics make sense or not. Trying to, I am a huge believer in the MVP and and if you can cut things to make the date, A, it means it wasn't really minimal, but B, you get to fulfill your promises to the company and to the market about what you're doing. Ambiguity is your friend on product, on specifications. What you're asked, you have a lot of fudge room on. Hit the date and learn what makes sense. Those are kind of my follow-on topics. You guys are excessively quiet.
I had a question for you. Oh, go ahead.
I have a question, David. I'm, especially the relationship with the CEO. He also interacts with other departments like sales, customer success, marketing, and seemingly, I'm not going to communicate like that. Yeah. But there is, seemingly maybe those other departments, they are building roads the way they've built them a long time. But how do you combat that?
Yeah, so I had this conversation once. I worked for this guy named Kevin. He said, I don't understand why you can't consistently hit your dates. Sales consistently hits their targets. And I said, well, Kevin, there's a couple things. First of all, that's actually not true. They don't consistently hit their targets. Second of all, they get 5 shots on goal. They only need to make 1. They have a bunch of leads to come in. They don't all have to be sales. What we do is fundamentally different. In that every one of our shots on goal has to win if you're measuring us on dates. Here's what I encourage you to measure us on. Measure us on whether we increase some metric for the business by the aggregate of what we're doing. We might miss date on 1 epic or 2 epics, but did we drive customer value? Did we drive customer usage? Because that's what matters. If we're 2 weeks short, if we're 2 weeks longer on a project than we expected, but we got it out and we got the increased customer usage or whatever metric that we care about that indicates customer usage that's going to drive revenue and drive profitability. I'm fond of making bold statements. So my statement about all product managers are bad at their job, it's not quite true, right? That is a component of the job that the product team has got to do, just like a component of the job that an engineer has to do is write code. It is a precondition that will, in the product conceptualization, is a side effect of the validation, a really good side effect. So now we've about what they know that you don't know. They're closer to the problem.
Dictates the key results or dictates the how and the what and the how. But you set the objective. Okay.
That's exactly right. So back to your question about product managers, they're going to come up with conversation.
Robust discussion with I'm not just going to say the CEO, the rest of the leadership team about whether the company wants to optimize for predictability or for throughput is super helpful. It generally tends to lead to having the right discussion, and of course, everybody wants everything, and so you can. But I think it's helpful because it does force the discussion about, like, is the company like really needing to deliver these specific things in a specific timeline, and that's the most important thing, or is like sort of constantly being able to adjust course more important? And it's not always the same, like depending on the market. That isn't just a philosophical thing, right? Like if you're I'll give you like a good example. If you're doing work in the telco space, telcos just generally run on very long timelines with lots of planning and a high need for predictability over very long periods of time. And so just depending on the market that you're in, where you need to turn the knob there could be a bit different. So it's kind of a meta conversation, but one that I think, at least for me, has been helpful. I'm curious what you think about that.
I think that's absolutely true. And that's absolutely true. And I tend not to optimize for those companies. What I mean by that is that clearly a telecom company is a tech company. Not tend to be important in those companies. That does not make them less interesting and less valuable. But you're right, predictability is more important. In regulated markets, I'm working with a company called Reify Health in Boston right now, and they do a SaaS service for clinical trials. They grew 10x last year. So clearly a growth company, really interesting company. They work with Pfizer and Eli Lilly and Merck, and you can imagine in a COVID time, there's a lot of people signing onto their services. And so they do operate very quickly, but there are some things where what that means is that there's a tax on innovation on every time they release things, and they have to talk about we could get this released on day X, but we've got to do these other things, which maps to your consistency thing, like HIPAA compliance, or right now they're about to, well, I can't say, they're an international company now, and they're going to release in nations that have interesting and different data privacy laws. Not ones that, as American, that don't represent the way that we think of privacy as kind of from an EFS. That's these interesting data privacy concerns in these countries that we have not been in before. And we've had that explicit conversation about what we're doing and why we're doing it, and that we're slowing down to do that. And it is a bit you have to set, and you have to have that conversation. You have to have that conversation. So that's absolutely true. Just chat with stuff. We have newsletters that we do, weekly Clubhouse, a bunch of other stuff. Here's a bunch of stuff on this last slide. I assume you guys are distribute the slide. Show me the time and I'll read the question. Tell me what time that was.
At 8:16.
I argue that it's a battle of two things. It's a battle of the OKRs, which is where you're trying to drive the company, and then the different epics you could build and which of those best.
Better answer is, okay, I understand the priority call you're asking me for. I'll get back to you. Kind of approach. It's also a super hard thing to figure out how to do well, but I say in every large organization I've worked in with senior executives, that's the approach that
always be creating value, right? Don't create a problem, create value, and feel free to argue. But so Bob, now is what you're saying correct, but it's consistent with not only does the company have to create value for its customers, you as CTO have to create value for the people in your ecosystem, the CEO, the CPO, the VP of sales. You're either creating value or you're taking value. And if you consistently create value, good things will tend to happen to you. If you take value, bad things will consistently. And so I heard what you had to say. Let me tell you my thoughts on it. Here's how I think we can solve. Here's how I think we're going to solve the problem. We're going to move ahead with this and let you give me feedback. That's
it is in the realm of the leaders and not the entire org or people who cares, right? Which I like. My question, and also even the purpose, you're open to even change the purpose of the org if needed, right? And also yes. The location. What do you think, and how do you kind of like do it?
Yeah, so I refer you to Conway's Law, which exactly talks about this, which says an organization produces doesn't say exactly, produces code, produces product that looks like the structure of the organization. And I completely agree with you. I tell people in my organizations, expect that the organizational design is going to get refactored just like architecture. And so as I'm putting new things in the roadmap, I might re-architect the organization against different needs that you're fulfilling. There's, assuming that you may be an infrastructure layer, but I completely agree with you that you need to reorganize it. And you need to reorganize it when you think about what you're trying to build and how you're trying to build, whether your teams are aligned, well aligned, and well resourced to do those things. So now rebuilding organizations outside of mine, like, hey, marketing needs to now organize like this, or sales should organize like that because we're doing these progress. You're not empowered to do that, but you can engage in the conversation. But let me just tell you the Disney Plus story. So I was working, the group said to me, tell me what you told Scarpy, who was the CTO, about engineering and product management and how to make it better. And I said to Bruce, I can tell you how to make it 10% better. And that might sound really, really good. Something that's much harder. And the much harder thing will have more impact. He said, well, tell me about it. I said, well, in the first case, if I tell you to make it 10% better, it means that Netflix will kill you slower. In the second case, you might win or you might lose. And I don't know which one. I said, which would you like to talk about? I said, I'd like to talk to you about this. I want to talk about the second one. I said, your fundamental problem here is not your engineering group or your product management group. Your fundamental problem here is your org design. The guy who ran ABC Primetime, he had a large over-the-air group that made a lot of money, and he had a small digital group of engineers and product managers that was sexy and he loved it, but it didn't produce the revenue, and so the revenue got the attention. And the woman who ran ABC News, the same thing, and the guy who ran Disney Channel, the same thing. I said, Bruce, over the internet, video content, until you bring them together and make them one group, you'll never be great. Their fundamental problem is an organizational design problem, not a process problem, not a personnel problem. You might have those two.
Is it two teams or two organizations that you're trying to merge?
Merge the three organizations into one team. And the way the Walt Disney Company is organized, that all the channels in the marketplace report to the CEO, who's Bob Iger at the time. So Parks and Resorts, Studios, Disney ABC Television Group, ESPN all report to the CEO. I said, you have to take this group. It's a channel to the marketplace. It's got to report to Iger. And then they did it, and it became Disney Plus.
Wait, you say that your recommendation led to them merge those groups together?
So I don't want to claim to be the only one who told them to do it.
Sure.
But yes, I assume, look, there's a lot of smart people in the world. I claim to be smart, but being smart is a very common commodity. The Walt Disney Company is a very large company. I could not have been the only one that was making this recommendation.
And is it because they all had this pretty much the same purpose, so there was no point of separating them? That's high level one.
They all had the same purpose. The advantage I have over an employee at the Walt Disney Company and a lot of places is I'm a consultant, so I can say things
objective
that it doesn't change my career. Right? I'm pre-fired.
Yeah.
Right? We've already decided that I'm fired the day I walk in. We just haven't decided when. So I have flexibility to say things that it's harder for an employee to say.
Okay, so because they have the same purpose, they probably have similar objectives, maybe. Because you can you can still restructure it into three different groups with different objectives, maybe. That's another one way to do it, but then it still requires restructuring. Right.
Squads, one of the things that they said was, and you'll know this better than, was a process itself and change.
Yes,
and right?
I helped on those videos.
Awesome.
It was a process of constant change. Any of the things were checkpoints, and it has continued to evolve. But that, to me, is the essence of the Spotify model.
Right, and that a lot of that initial stuff didn't work.
That's not true. Sorry, that's
Okay,
not
fine.
true.
Okay,
It
okay,
absolutely
tell me.
worked. It's because I ran
Okay, so-
the Music Player Tribe, which was the tribe that the white paper was based on, and for several years. So it absolutely worked. Session in the Seattle CTO group, I moved back from Sweden. I'm happy to talk about it again. But yeah,
I would like to talk with you offline.
Sure.
Because what I say to people similar things, which is I say the Spotify squad model is a great place to start, and expect that it won't work, but it is but you're going to have to modify it for yourself.
Oh yeah, I tell people don't do the Spotify squad model because it worked great for Spotify. It's not going to work for your company because your company isn't Spotify. Same reason I would say don't do the Microsoft model because your company's not Microsoft or Amazon or Netflix, right? It's learn to take some lessons from what other people at any company I've been at since. That's not it. We're different companies. Yeah.
So, but I'd like to talk to you offline because I've read quite a bit of if there's modifications, right? And there's separable architectural coding units where people could iterate in some component of the interface or some component of the architecture where the teams could be relatively independent. And that's a starting condition that often doesn't exist. If I have to make a binary choice, it's by business customer, although I would define it slightly differently. It's slight nuances by who you serve. So at is or isn't a drug, and there's not two teams, one for clinicians and one for pharma companies. Do we have enough patients coming in to run the A/B test on? What is the status of the patients? Those are two different teams. They get different squads. On the clinician side, it's how are we sourcing the patients? What does that look like? Each of those essentially gets different squads. And so it's much more focused on who we serve. Once again, the same alignment of are we creating value? That works up to a point. And the place where it breaks down is where there's common infrastructure services that has to serve multiple user types. And then there's essentially infrastructure teams focused on
Kindle. I'm just curious to know what format you prefer to read or
audio. Kindle.
Awesome.
That's it. Other questions? Comments?
David, what's next for you as far as like learning or reading? What?
I read about, but the bulk of the world is there, so maybe it's not horrible. What else do I read about? I read a lot about just different business topics, what's going on in business. I read a lot of stuff if Mark Suster writes it, I read it. He's the managing partner at Upfront Ventures here in LA. He's a really smart guy, and thinks that he's wrong a bunch, but he's always interesting. I listened to a bunch of stuff produced by Andreessen Horowitz, although they produce so much content that it's hard to follow.
A16Z.
They have a podcast, they have a clubhouse, they write blog posts. There's just a whole volume of content there. Ben Horowitz is super smart. Mark Andreessen super smart.
You want to stay in the consultant area, and you want to kind of like don't want to master a specific vertical like a healthcare or entertainment. You just want to stay like above everything in the process.
Yes.
In the product realm.
Yes.
Realm. Okay.
Yeah. This is the best job I've ever had. I've been doing this about 8 years. Mm-hmm. It's not just the best job I ever had. It's the best job I ever had by about an order of magnitude. And so I just love learning about stuff. I occasionally, and Alexander slaps my wrist for this, and he should do it more often, I occasionally will read something and post about it on Twitter or on LinkedIn with my opinion about it. Now on Twitter, it's hard to have nuance on Twitter, right? You get small number of characters, 288 characters, 288, small number of characters. So I will post an opinion about, but I will, I'll tweet about stuff that I read that I think is interesting. Okay.
Looking forward to see the slides, David. Hopefully, you're gonna share the slides, right, with Stefan.
Yeah. I'll send you guys a slide. I'm gonna change that typo up front. Ping me and we'll chat. And I'm glad to do it. I love talking.
Alexander as well for helping facilitate.
Oh, that's no, just kidding. But thank you, and thank you, Stephanie. I'll send over I addressed the typo, so I'll probably send the slides over to you in the next 5-10 minutes or so.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. That's why right there is why Alexander deserves expensive gifts. He's already solved the problem.
All right.
See y'all. Bye-bye.
Okay.
Hey there.
Hey, how are you?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm all right. Yes, it was